Urban Farmhouse Press presents By the River Reading Series. From Waawiiyaatanong, home of Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit, Michigan. Wednesday, April 14th, 2021. Featuring KARL JIRGENS, Jade Wallace, and Mark Lally-Barrett.
So I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. This program is being produced on land. This region of Waawiiyaatanong is recognized under the Three Fires Confederacy of the Oneida, Wyandot, and Potawatomi nations. They have taken care of this land since time immemorial, and we recognize the nations that continue to call this place home. So before we launch in, I would like to kind of give you a little idea. Today we have Mark first, and then we are going to be hosting to Jade, and then our closer tonight is KARL JIRGENS. So I'd like to introduce Mark first. Mark is you may know him from Carousel magazine. His book Brick, Brick, Brick is published in Thug. No, it's called Hug book now. Book Hug. And we will have links to that on our website for anyone who wants to see that. I do have one of the carousels that we drug out. This magazine is a hybrid literature for mutant readers, it says. And it is a delightful mix of visual, literary, immersion, a remix. And it really does embody the talent of Mark. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the microphone on to him. And we are delighted to host him today. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Today we're in Windsor, Ontario. Happy to be meeting with everyone via Zoom. I moved back to Windsor after a long time away last October, and the By the River reading series was one of the few sort of things in the community that I immediately plugged into. Coming from Toronto, there are a lot of reading series. And we were definitely looking. So By the River at Mackenzie Hall, the event that Marty Gervais puts on at the beautiful mansion in the Walkerville Park, I forget what the park is called, is another sort of mainstay that we sort of found in the city. And then the pandemic sort of hit, and I was actually scheduled to be part of the By the River reading series even before I moved here, I believe. I had met Daniel Lockhart at Museum London, where I did a reading, and Daniel was also part of that same festival. And, you know, the Windsor connection immediately bonded us. But a whole year has gone by, and we're doing it online now. So it's great to be here. Thanks to both Daniel and Emily for putting on the event. It's interesting because readings have always been kind of difficult for me. Oftentimes, as I was telling Emily yesterday when we were sort of doing a preamble, my work tends to blur the visual and the literary, and sometimes that meant that we would have to look for spaces that specifically had projection, and it became a kind of hard thing to present. And now, assuming that I'm host, and it looks like I am, I'll just be able to switch over to a little bit of a PowerPoint to show some of the visual works that I can read along. So I'm going to start with a series of haiku works. Short form writing is something I've been exploring a little more in the last year. I think attention spans and everything going on with the world just means that, you know, like longer form works are harder to sort of focus on. And I don't really have a haiku background per se. I kind of got interested in the form. There was a contest that sort of flew up in my feed and I thought I'll enter that. And I actually got like a kind of honorary mention for the piece I did. And it just was like great to be able to sit with my pad and just work on little haiku pieces. I don't know, eventually 20 or 30 of them came forward and I started shopping them around, and a suite of them were accepted to the Thames Review in London, Ontario. And I've yet to read these works, so I'm going to start by reading a suite of 7 haiku called Horse in Quicksand. Spent all night tickling avatars on a mission to unravel time. Live life to its end. Dying is a business masked by politeness. Put head to pillow. One night marries into next, a horse in quicksand. Rune of a storefront. You find rich men attractive, but ask, at what cost? Where did today go? Speed is also a pleasure to distract the soul. Engine of plenty. Search the cloud for answers to life's stormy questions. Syllabic outbreak. This problem is everywhere. Haiku tests virus. Yeah, thank you. So those short form sort of writings led into, I guess, a more substantial body of work, which I'm, I guess, reading from the first time today as well. And those do require, I guess, a little bit of a visual frame. So for some reason, a lot of times the way I work is I just work on things and many things at once, and some things come together really quickly and some just sit for literally 5 or 6 years before they mean anything to me. And I work often from like binders. I just sort of collect things in binders in my studio. So I've been working on this circle graphics thing. Like every time I saw a circle that interested me, I just put them in this binder. And at some point, I don't really know how or why, but I wrote to a circle, wrote to one of them, and I really liked its effect. And instantly I started my pandemic project, my studio project. It felt like something I could do in a single sitting or a few sittings. And so I'm working on a book called Circularities. And I'm now going to switch over quickly to sharing my screen, which I believe should put us here.
And everything looks good.
Okay, and we'll go from here. So yeah, 5 excerpts from Circularities. Pain. Windows flash to broken glass, a quiet dawn, and this party has now ended. Apperception. Over the vocalization of skylarks, I heard my own breathing and pressed record. Hypnagogia. The blink is blank. Wide asleep, we wake in hosts. Bloom sweet, but dream difficult. Pulse. Anxiety's knot unravels ulent, a primal pitch, howled whole, and all for naught. Oculus. Nervous optics blur dread into the vitreous like blood fixed to the back of the mind. So those 5 works have appeared in either the Quarantine Review or Anti-Lang, and the Anti-Ligorius project. I also have some works at Pandemic Publications, and they're actually, one of the things that I find interesting about this work is you'll notice when I read them, I have a sort of set of pauses in a rather kind of 3-line structure, a little bit like haiku. And yet I sort of decided that punctuation sort of interfered with the circularity. But I started animating the text around the circle. And so because it's the internet, I can shop those and they kind of feel like variants of what will eventually appear in the book. I encourage you to check out pandemicpublications.com and look for the circularities that are up there. I think they have 3 other ones. And those are 3 animated versions. As well, there are forthcoming 5 circularities at Duende, which is an American publication. Okay, so I'm going to show this piece. It's another piece I've never really shown before. And it's from 2015. And I guess it represents the start of a manuscript that I just completed, although this work isn't in the manuscript. Some of you may be familiar with blackout poetry. It's quite a popular form at this point. I started doing blackout comics about 2015, and I don't think anyone really has done this, and certainly I have never seen a kind of full book of them. So I'm quite pleased to be at the tail end of a book I called BLK, or Black Book or Bleak Book. It's meant to be read either way. And I guess this represents a little bit the process, although this is different than an earlier work and it looks different than what's in the final form. But I usually look for found works. In this case, I'm using a Seth comic, and Seth rarely does these sort of singular works, and it's a bit experimental for him. It's a lot of text and this kind of circular address and the whole sort of thing revolving around it. So just to give you a sense of what's going on, I'll do this little toggle and you can see that I use the architecture of the page and the words that are on the page to sculpt a new thing and something that's closer to poetry, I guess, comic poetry. This piece is called Something Exits the House, for Gregory Gallant, which is Seth's real name. A light switch is clicked, a memory of night, the sound of the river. A basement window is closed, a darkened room faded, the sound of the night. And the last thing that I'll be showing today is from, again, another body of work. So I have a very keen interest in 4-panel comics, and I realized in retrospect that they also have a kind of haiku-like brevity to them. The 4-panel sequence is what we know, in the newspaper, Garfield, and those sorts of things, Peanuts. But I really got interested in the form, and I've gotten a lot of other people interested in the form, and I run a site called 4panel.ca, where at this point, like dozens and dozens of comic artists from around the world have contributed strips. I'm also one of the contributors, and in the meantime, I've been working on a manuscript of 4-panel poetry of my own. Comic poems, and I'm going to read a few of them today, 6. I'm also going to kind of perform them, so they only exist in their final form online. A bright yellow Gothic. Births, deaths. I'm sorry, I got my screen blank. Think about me. Got a light kind of up and it's a bit in the way. Kingdom, an animal frozen, a heavenly body, a small demon, a movement away from shore. The things that follow you. Heart racing in the middle of the night. Are you? His fingers were numb. It was all inside him looking out there, the storm baring its teeth. We've shadowed the moon. Let us blow out the candles. Was that singing? Hark. Early, early comes the dark. Fever dream. I felt a cold wind rush past. And as the world disappears, time, almost impossible to believe. And I'll jump out from my sharing and I guess just finish with a little point towards 4panel.ca, which I'll put the link for right now. So I just finished a fairly large project, a Canada Council Digital Originals grant, where I was actually given funding to create animated 4 panels to sort of think outside of the final product of the book and more of the screen. And so thinking about these readings of the strips, which I had already started to dabble with at various reading series, I wanted to kind of get a little bit more simple animation baroque with it. I certainly am not doing full kind of animated things, but really treating those panels still as spaces and movement, either horizontally or whatever, time and sound and how those things react to the 4-panel strip. So I finished 24 animated 4-panel poems. The project just ended in the past couple months, and I was sort of putting them out throughout September to February type thing of the pandemic. And all 24 are there, they're free to look at. So again, I encourage you to check those out. And I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That was just beautiful. As you're reading, there is this list of links happening in the chat, and we are going to copy those. We'll compile them and throw them on our website and Facebook. But I think that's a gift right there, just to see all of these great links. Mark, that was amazing.
Thank you. You were back to host.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think this platform really lends itself so well to that fusion of visual and literary that you do. Thank you so much. I'm going to now turn the mic over to Jade Wallace. Jade is joining us, and she is has been in this literary scene hopping during the pandemic. We have been seeing her in all sorts of different ways. She's 2 poetry chapbooks with Made magazine. She's also the review editor at Carousel, and she's an organizing member of the Draft Reading Series. She has, her chapbook's A Trip to the Zoo, ZZOO, and A Barely Concealed Design. And she has told me that there is a book in the works, and we are all highly anticipating the conclusion of that. So I am going to hand the microphone over to Jade. You are the show.
Thank you for that introduction, Emily, and thank you to all of the board members who run By the River Reading Series. It's a real honor to be asked to read here. I'm a relatively recent transplant to the area from Niagara by way of Toronto, and it's nice to be welcomed so warmly into the community over the past year and a half or so that I've been here. So thank you for having me. Thank you to everyone for coming. Hello to some familiar faces. And today I'm going to be reading a short story, and the short story was originally published in the Dalhousie Review several years ago, probably one of my first short stories published, but I recently revised it, not to keep mentioning Canada Council, but their digital originals project that happened last year actually funded a series of electronic chapbooks and audiobooks, so I was revising some of my old stories and presenting some new work. And this was one of them. So it's had quite an update since its first life several years ago. It's a fairly short story, so we should be able to get it in within my 15-minute window. But yeah, I'm going to read that. This is called The Recovering. Monique organized her life according to the principle that there is an objectively ideal place for each entity in the universe at a given time. This applied equally to the trinkets in her house as it did to her own body. She judged the perfection of the placement on a balance of moral, practical, and aesthetic considerations and adjusted accordingly when necessary. Monique had long ago decided that her correct place between the hours of 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. was in bed. Since coming to that decision, there had been only one occasion on which an adjustment had been required. The night after her father died, Monique had not been in her bed, but next to his in the hospital. By morning, her family consisted solely of distant cousins who she would have no need to associate with once her father's funeral was over. During the night she spent waiting for the funeral, Monique hardly slept, so she paced her apartment instead of lying in bed. When she finally watched her father's casket being lowered into the ground beside her mother's grave, she thought, "There goes the last person to whom I will ever be loyal." By the night after the funeral, Monique had reestablished her regular schedule. One night, a few months following her father's death, Monique was sleeping when she woke suddenly and stepped out of her body. She looked down and saw her physical form lying in bed, snuffling a bit in its unconscious state. Content that her body was still precisely where it was supposed to be, Monique turned away from it and went out of her apartment. The air was cool and the sky was periwinkle blue. That night and many nights after, she walked the streets to the edge of the lake. She would often stop along the way to peer into the darkened windows of closed businesses and homes where families slept inside. It was the closest that Monique often got to other people or to unknown places. A little before the night was halfway through, Monique would turn around, walk home, and step back into her body just before sunrise. It felt like wading into warm waters. She would close her eyes as her head went under, and, when she resurfaced, take the weight of her body up with her. Then she would go to the kitchen and get ready for work. A less devout adherent to Monique's guiding belief in the possibility of perfectly positioning oneself in the world might have been troubled by the prospect of their consciousness unhitching itself from their body and wandering. But Monique felt that if body and consciousness were separable entities, then she had no reason to assume that the ideal location of the body and the consciousness would necessarily be the same at all times, particularly when the body was asleep and in no need of its complement. Thus, Monique was able to smoothly integrate her moonlit roving into the rest of her impeccable routine. Indeed, Monique took thousands of walks before her careful regimen was threatened. The city, the weather, and all other discernible factors seemed innocuous on the day that Monique discovered a troubling incongruity, which made her discovery all the more startling. On that day, Monique walked back to her bedroom before the sun had risen. The room was still dark. It therefore took Monique a few moments of scanning with both eyes and hands for her to realize that her body was gone from the bed. She briskly searched the rest of the apartment. Realizing that her body was definitely not where she left it, she began to reason her way through the problem. If a consciousness could move without a body, a fact she had somehow spent a great deal of her life not knowing, then perhaps it was also possible for a body to move without a consciousness. Her body might be somewhere outside of the apartment without her being aware of it. She wondered where her body would go at near dawn, when it had previously never found any reason to go anywhere at that hour. Then again, perhaps the problem was that, without consciousness, the body did not know where it was going, and so flung itself about haphazardly like a garden hose without a guiding hand. Monique was profoundly disturbed by the idea of a body moving without knowing where it was going or why. Reserving the possibility of her body being someplace completely arbitrary, Monique thought it made the most sense to first visit the places her body was familiar with: her workplace, the grocery store, the bank, her father's house. None would be open at that hour, but Monique hoped she might find her body skulking forlornly in a doorway. When her initial searches failed, she sought her body in the places it knew somewhat less well: a bakery she liked but reserved for special occasions, a pond she only sometimes took lunch beside, the library. When that too failed, she confronted the possibility that her body had been moved involuntarily. She figured it unlikely that she had been the victim of a kidnapping or other interference, because her apartment had been in its usual undisturbed condition when she returned. But perhaps there had been some kind of audible emergency. Perhaps her body started crashing about or screaming, and the neighbors had heard it and called for an ambulance, and the superintendent had led in the paramedics who, finding her body either chaotic or unresponsive, had taken it to the hospital. Monique went to the town hospital and looked in every room. She repeated her own name softly, over and over, in case her body might hear it and come running to her. She asked herself whether her physical body would be able to sense the metaphysical vibrations of a spirit's ersatz vocal cords, but found it was a question she could not answer. When she turned up nothing at the hospital, Monique sat outside of it for a minute to think. The sun was long up. Soon she would be expected at work. She put her face in her hands. She tried closing her eyes and emptying her mind and inviting thoughts to fill it. She hoped she might unintentionally commune with her body or otherwise intuit where it had gotten to. The hospital was growing steadily noisier. Optimistic parents hoping to get their children seen before afternoon classes, night shift workers coming in after getting home ill and exhausted, old people slowly waking up worse than the day before. All of them were crowding the parking lot and bustling up to and through every wing. Monique needed a quieter place. For days, she wended her way through the city's low-traffic streets and traced the shapes of the paths she had previously only rarely traveled. Her body might have left the city, but there was no sense in pursuing that possibility until she had excluded every area closer to home. After a few days of wandering, she felt drawn to the cemetery where her father was buried. She accepted that it might be the objectively ideal location for her to be at that time, since it was one of the only remaining areas of the city that she had not visited. Furthermore, she was unable to think of, and rationally argue for, a more ideal location. As she entered the gates, she saw a small funeral party in the distance. She moved toward them and stood among the few mourners. The body must have been unclaimed, for it was in a shoddy wooden box. A pine coffin always seemed like a joke to Monique, death shrouded in evergreen. Then she heard her own name in the mouth of the priest. She looked to the meek headstone. It was her corpse in that box and her own burial she was watching. Was she supposed to follow her body underground? She would not. As Monique watched the dirt cover her, she thought, I will abandon anyone, even myself. The end. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Especially in this pandemic, I feel like I am not in my body either. That's beautiful. Thank you. Yes, Jade, it's been a lovely experience getting to know you and Mark in the city, and Windsor is that place that I think is blossoming, and it's constantly changing itself and moving itself. So with the additions and changes that we have all the time. That is, I'm calling him our closure. We're in baseball season now. So we're doing great. The game is tied and we have Karl up at bat. So before I give him the microphone, I want to tell everybody who should know but may not of KARL JIRGENS. So he is the head of University of Windsor's it says head in one of your bios.
Former head.
Former head. All right. Of the University of Windsor, but still creative writing department. And Karl is the overseer of our Rampike, which I also, being married to Daniel Lockhart, he always surfaces with who knows what from that basement. And this is Rampike. And if you guys get a chance to check these out, if you haven't already, you should. These are delightful magazines. Karl, you're the author of 4 books. And we have you guest editing Hamilton Arts Literary Magazine. Your most recent, the Ellipse magazine, you have a review of Ken Babstock's. And the Ellipse magazine was... I
have a review in Carousel. I have an experimental translation article in Ellipse magazine, which is hosted by, among other people, Beatriz Hausner, who is in the audience today.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Perfect. Well, I was writing and there was so much to the depth of KARL. And so I'm going
Hard to keep track.
I know it is, but that's great. That's good. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you, and we are delighted to hear what you have for us today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Emily. Yeah, and thanks for the reading so far, Mark and Jade. Wonderful, wonderful. Really happy to be here. Thanks to the By the River organizers, Dan, and especially Emily Lockhart. Thanks to the Windsor Feminist Theatre for hosting the event. Special thanks to Jade Wallace and Mark LaLiberte for sharing the virtual stage with me. So I always begin with thanks. So huge thanks to those who have taken time to listen today. Deep thanks to the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, including the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi, on whose traditional territory this presentation comes from. Thanks to the sacrifices of our heroic healthcare workers around the world. Keep wearing your masks. We're not out of the woods yet. And the pieces I'll read today might be called absurdist, surrealist, mystery, or satiric. I'll start with a very short poem and a tip of the hat to George Bowering, who inspired me for this one. Poem. Yesterday I was gardening, planting squash, digging dirt, when my shovel struck something below the surface. I reached down for a closer look, pulled it out of the earth, knocked the dirt off, and found this poem. Mark LaLiberte recently showed an interest in palindromes, so I'll read this little piece now. It's from the Bureau of Canadian Pataphysics and the Grand Satrap for the Reclamation of Broken Wristwatches. I noticed that there are at least some people who are interested in pataphysics in the audience. And this is a poem about an author who tries to write a poem to meet a deadline. Eventually the poem arrives, but it's considerably later than hoped. The delinquent poem then offers a series of lame excuses for being so tardy. Late poem. Late, as usual, the poem arrives, knocking at the door, fidgeting. It apologizes for its tardiness, smiles sheepishly, rubs a muddy boot into the welcome mat, and proceeds to declaim. I had acid reflux. They wouldn't let me out of the lockup. I was abducted by circus people. I was holding the map upside down. I locked the keys in the car. I had to meet with my parole officer. I didn't know it was loaded. The dog ate my shoes. The pilot was drunk. I'm the CEO of an internet startup. There was a stockholders meeting. A sinkhole swallowed my bus. I'm dyslexic. I have abophobia, commonly known as fear of palindromes. I'm in a motivational crisis. There was a nuclear meltdown. The serpent beguiled me. I swallowed a male potency drug and couldn't stand up. I had to shampoo the cat. I became a prisoner of war. It wasn't even my war. I didn't have a good ending. I lost your address. I was set up. I had to wait for the cable guy. I made my flight but caught the wrong plane. I had red lights all the way. I suffer from Cotard syndrome. I think I'm dead. You didn't expect me to drive here in this condition, did you? What could I say but, egad, a bass tone denotes a bad age. Enter, dear friend. The poem enters, scans the room, but refuses a chair. It looks me square in the eye and decries, what is this? Either this carnivalesque pseudo-biographical extended metaphor goes or I go. I blink. The poem snorts with derision, spins on its heel, exits haughtily, planting fuming footnotes along the garden path. Footnotes. Abophobia, fear of palindromes. Palindrome, text that can be read same way forward or backward. Example, damn it, I'm mad, or egad, a bass tone denotes a bad age. Cotard syndrome, belief that one is already dead. Next, this story alludes to several important scientific and literary figures and texts, including some that I posted on the chat. Such as Thomas Pynchon's The Crying of Lot 49, actress and inventor Hedy Lamarr, the paradoxical Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges, Christopher Marlowe, who authored the Faust drama, where a professor sells his soul to the devil to gain knowledge, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on How We Face Death, Ray Kurzweil, who theorized that eventually machines would achieve sentience and start improving themselves faster than is humanly possible, inspiring novels and movies such as The Terminator. This story also references Georges Perec, who helped develop the constrained form of writing, now known as Oulipo. In addition, it helps to know that animation impresario Walt Disney had himself cryogenically frozen when he died. That may be an apocryphal fact, I'm not sure, in hopes that a future high-tech culture would reawaken and heal him. Lastly, the story references Schrodinger's cat, a thought experiment where a hypothetical cat may be considered simultaneously alive and dead as a result of an event that may or may not occur. This thought experiment has no clear resolution. This story is about desire and opens with an allusion to Deleuze and Guattari, French post-structural critics who have written about economics and desire. By the way, in a capricious moment, I sent this story to the Paris Review. Meltdown, a fable, with apologies to Deleuze and Guattari. It happened one day. There were 3 desire machines in a secret vault. One day, 2 of the machines melted down. The third rested silently. The 3 desire machines were built to satisfy all wishes within reason. One desire machine was to be auctioned next year. The auction's opening bid, set insanely high, was justified by research and production costs. Some argued that the opening bid was set too high. If you could afford bidding on a desire machine, you didn't need one. Others argued the opening bid was set too low. Governments could pool resources, purchase a desire machine, and deploy it capriciously, benevolently, or nefariously. For obvious reasons, renting a desire machine was out of the question. Prior to the meltdown, all 3 machines rested in Yoyodyne's San Narciso vault. That's the Pynchon reference for those who are on their toes. A communication agent publicly announced Yoyodyne's logic in producing 3 desire machines. The first machine, which is up for auction next year, will grant any desire to any individual group. As a precaution, contingencies are integrated into the circuitry, so the machine is entirely safe for public use. The publicist further explained that contingency A was installed on the assumption that eventually someone using a desire machine would request something impinging on other people's lives. Yoyodyne's techies nicknamed this the paradox contingency. An obvious example involved a global pandemic that benefited courier companies, big pharma, cloud computing, and e-commerce while decimating the world's population. Safeguards were installed, causing desire machines to melt down when facing such paradoxical requests. In addition, there was contingency B, which was installed purely as an afterthought. It triggered meltdowns if an impossible wish was made, but this was considered a redundant contingency because desire machines could provide virtually anything. Techies called the units machine genies. Following construction of the prototype, an improved model was built. Then another unit was assembled as a precaution. If an insane desire emerged from Unit 1, then it could be neutralized by Unit 2. The second unit was held for safekeeping and was not for auction. Meanwhile, the prototype collected dust in Yoyodyne's vault. No one spoke of it. Designed by Lamar, it functioned well enough but didn't have all the bugs worked out. If anybody had asked Lamar about the design, Lamar would have said, "The purpose of this desire machine is to disrupt neurotic symptoms arising from constricting capitalistic structures while replacing them with healthier schizophrenic forms of desire." That's the Deleuze and Guattari illusion, by the way. But no one ever bothered to ask Lamar, and everyone agreed that the prototype was a bit capricious. When the 2 newer units experienced inexplicable meltdowns, speculations surged. Some argued that it was an inside job. No one understood why someone would destroy 2 updated, perfectly functioning desire machines. One expert proposed that the prototype had achieved machine sentience and decided to eliminate the other 2 machines by demanding either contingency A or contingency B. But few took the machine sentience possibility seriously, except Lamar, who had proposed the idea. If anyone had asked Lamar, Lamar would have said, "I have seen and read Euripides' tragedy Hippolytus. It's a story of lust, slander, suicide, and misplaced desire." Lamar had also read Kurzweil's views on machines and the notion that one day they might exercise free will and perhaps achieve spiritual awareness. Lamar understood the algorithms involved with automated knowledge acquisition. At a departmental meeting assembled to determine the cause of the meltdowns, the meeting's chair took time to dismiss any theory involving machine sentience, including Lamar's, and referenced the Chinese room argument. We all know that a program cannot achieve understanding or consciousness regardless of how human-like the program may behave. The expert continued, we're all familiar with Searle's thought experiment on minds, brains, and programs, which explained that a computerized machine with the right inputs and outputs can only mimic a human mind. Furthermore, I needn't remind you that Gottfried Leibniz, designer of binary computer language in the 1600s, refuted any theory of a mechanistic mind. Everyone in the assembled group of experts understood that to achieve machine sentience, the prototype's AI had to assume a human personality. The group revisited Searle's distinction between simulating a mind and having a mind. They were a heady bunch. They concluded the machine sentience was a preposterous red herring. After all, what could a desire machine possibly desire if its sole purpose was to satisfy the desires of others? So the Yo-Yo Dine experts began by investigating two meltdowns by considering the simpler contingency B possibilities. This one's for you, Mark. They contemplated a litany of outlandish wishes that could cause a meltdown. One expert suggested, what if someone requested the creation of a unicyclist dressed as Darth Vader, wearing a kilt, shoveling snow while playing flaming bagpipes? Yet another expert in the group replied, big deal, I've already seen that on the internet. A third interjected, what if we replace the unicycle with a motorized pogo stick? The group dismissed all these options as too simple. One expert suggested Oulipo possibilities organized after Georges Perec's Life, a User's Manual. Beginning with several leaps of logic, the Oulipo expert explained, the outcomes of the stated desires could be determined by the potential moves of the knight in a game of chess. This idea brought an immediate objection. But dudes, that would mean the number of possible chess moves would be roughly 35 to the 80th, which I'm sure we all know is the Shannon number. One of the group members quietly explained that the Shannon number was named after Claude Shannon, who originated computer programming. The same overly excited group member exclaimed, dudes, the exponential possibilities of the Shannon number are, well, they're mystical. For all we know, the number loops back on itself. The subgroup was promptly assigned to investigate. It spent a full month exploring how a desire machine might react to Perec-Oulipo possibilities. At a follow-up assembly, the disappointed subgroup's leader sadly announced, we have found that any Perec-Oulipo conjecture is entirely passable. Such an approach couldn't have caused a meltdown. Then they turned to theosophy. One expert had read Borges and recited several lines from memory. God moves the player, he in turn the piece. But what God beyond God begins the round of dust and time and sleep and agony? Questions involving chess turned to immortality. One expert exclaimed, "Well, such theory flies in the face of several world religions." Another yelled, "Anyway, everlasting life is irresolvable if we consider Walt Disney's cryonic condition, especially following Ettinger's 1964 essay, The Prospect of Immortality." Yet another shouted, "We might as well discuss Schrodinger's cat, bah!" Out of the blue, in an effort to help, one expert who had read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross offered a quotation. "Beautiful people are those who have known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths." The group's chair stood up and announced, "I'm sure we all agree that if the human spirit can overcome such depths, then so can our desire machines." With that, the immortality hypothesis flew out the window. The experts then moved to the paradox contingency as a possible cause of meltdown. What might happen if someone enhanced their own life while degrading the lives of others? The scientists declared that upon facing a paradox wish, a properly functioning desire machine would immediately inform the requestee of the contradiction. In support, one expert quoted Marlowe's Faustus, "What nourishes me destroys me." They concluded that morality or an instinct for self-preservation would thwart any such requests. Another confirmed, "The desire machine's failsafe would override any paradox wishes, thereby avoiding a meltdown." The group muttered approval, but one free thinker exclaimed, "Dudes, what would happen if a despot wished to rule the world while other people sought self-determination. An angry voice shouted, "Wouldn't matter. We all know that domination and self-determination are not mutually exclusive. They've coexisted for millennia. Society endures regardless." Lamar, who normally remains silent, spontaneously interjected, "Remember, liberty and equality are mutually exclusive." The group's chair calmly announced, "In any case, the world hasn't changed much following the Meltdown event, so it's unlikely that a desire paradox was issued." Only Lamar argued that the prototype might have acquired machine sentience. Everyone agreed that Lamar had an unhealthy imagination. One expert whispered to the assembled group, "I don't know if I should mention this, but I've seen Lamar talking to the desire machines in our vault." Although Lamar was part of the group, another member spoke a little too loudly. "So what? We all know that Lamar's a bit daft." Lamar blushed. The group became rambunctious. Mindful of their low opinion, Lamar thought it prudent to avoid mentioning several outlandish ideas, including a self-cleaning oven that sanitized itself on the inside and the outside. It wasn't the best idea, but Lamar had never seen such an oven. Self-conscious of the group's prejudices, Lamar kept silent about other concepts, such as generating energy from hydrogen, altering human DNA so people could grow new teeth or new limbs, like sharks or some reptiles. Everyone settled down when the chair of the group brought the meeting back to order. "Calm down. We all know that Lamar's a bit capricious and probably only has this job because the brains in research like Lamar's ideas, despite the fact that they're outlandish, unprofitable, and possibly schizophrenic." Within the research group, only Lamar remembered that it was the department's task to turn impossible desires into actuality. Lamar never considered whether ideas met profit margins or stayed ahead of market curves, because those were matters that the finance department handled. No one ever asked because no one ever cared that Lamar had touched the soul of desire and understood that desire was pointless, lingering, forever out of reach. Thanks.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you so much. The comments on the side were just in referring to the brilliance of that. We will be so glad to archive this because that was wonderful. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, great readings by everybody today, I thought.
Yeah. And I think everyone wove together very well too. This was like the perfect group to balance each other out. That was very lovely. So I guess now if there were any questions, we can go ahead and open up the floor. If there's any comments or anything anyone would like to add.
Well, I wanted to ask both Mark and Jade to say something about their made combos that they sometimes work on, and maybe they could say a little bit about that because those are wonderful.
Yes, I agree.
Sure. We both have our singular practices, and I think the timeline just made it make sense to just focus on that. But Jade and I have a whole body of work that we've been developing together since about the last 3 years, 2 or 3 years. It started with just kind of using the online space pre-pandemic to write poems together, and it's sort of gone gradually from there. We've had 2 or 3 chapbooks so far, and I guess we have 2 or 3 manuscripts in progress, different bodies of work. And in terms of the little pun, it's like Mark and Jade made something together, Mark, Jade. It's kind of a dumb little name, but we're thinking like the idea of the way kind of music culture is a little bit more oriented towards long form collaborations. There seem to be many people who dabble with a little something. Writers are very solitary, and but giving it a kind of name sort of concretizes it more in the kind of band experience, I guess, in a way. And so that's something of what we're thinking. I don't know if Jade wants to say anything else.
That was very comprehensive. Well done.
Thanks.
We'll visit the by the river reading series again, maybe perhaps as that entity sometime in the future.
Yeah. I had this question when you were reading, Mark. I wish I would have asked right afterwards. Your circular poems that you wrote.
Yeah.
Could you start at any place? Because I was trying to read as you read. Sometimes it made sense.
Well, I mean, I sort of had to make a decision formally when I started the project, and so the first few I wanted them to really be that in a way, and it's a very difficult limiting thing, and there's already kind of like a spatial limitation in terms of how many words I can use, and so I always see the kind of 12 o'clock point as the start of the piece, and I think in a book format you would obviously get that. A few of them do like a perfect loop, but I'm not really emphasizing that as a necessary thing. Yeah.
Okay, good. I just wanted to ask that because it came so quick. I wanted to make sure that if you well, I've had two people ask me what currently that books or engagements that you guys are making. So maybe just as a concluding, we can start with Karl, go Jade, and then Mark. Maybe you guys can tell us what inspirational text you guys have been engaged in.
You mean like what we're reading or what we're writing?
Yeah, I think the question, there's now a lot coming on. Actually, someone wants to know to Karl, will that story be published soon?
Well, I'm hoping, yeah. I've got a collection of short stories coming out pretty soon in 22. That one's not in that bunch. I'm looking for a publisher for that one, actually. And lately, I think one of the questions was, what have you been reading for inspiration? I've been reading some Kazuo Ishiguro and a little bit of Salman Rushdie, just for fun. I like what Rushdie does. He writes some really great stories. And I just read a really interesting article about Justin Trudel, who was one of the spokespersons for the American Indian movement. And so I wore the hat in honor of that. And he was very busy on Alcatraz Island. And I just read a big article on working class poetry that's really amazing. That was sent to me by Greg Betts. And sorry not to see him here today, but I'll give him a hello. And I just read a really cool article about Atwood talking about Laurie Anderson of all people. And she published it in the London Guardian, and I was impressed by that. So that's what I've been reading, and I keep writing stuff, and I hope I can get that story I read today published somewhere. I've got a bunch of strange fiction like that elsewhere.
Yeah. We were just actually listening to Trudel's, his Alcatraz Rebellion is the show that he put on, and we were listening to a few episodes of that. So
yeah, great show. I was listening to that too.
Yeah, hive mind. Well, let's send it over to Jade, and why don't you tell us what you're in?
Sure. Well, I've got two main streams of reading right now. One is I'm doing my thesis, so I'm reading for my thesis. I'm basically working my way through my bibliography, which is a bizarre mix. I just finished reading a book on like forensics and amateur detectives, but next I'm reading Anna Garretta's Sphinx, which is originally a French novel. She was an experimental writer working with like constraint-based writing. And so Sphinx is, she wrote it when she was like 23, which is wild to me. But then the second stream is as a reviews editor for Carousel, I'm often reading a lot of the books we review. So that's contemporary fiction and poetry primarily, mostly from Canada, some from the US. And so that's very interesting to see, because it's always good to sort of keep tabs on what your peers are up to and what their interests are, and just sort of see where you fit in. And it's always interesting because sometimes you feel mediocre about the work, and then sometimes you find work you love that you never would have heard of, except that you're being sort of compelled to read so widely. So that's a nice experience, which I'll just to plug Carousel's experimental reviews again for a second. So Karl, of course, did one for us recently, which was lovely. And but we've got a whole load of them. We're always taking submissions. And by experimental reviews are basically just meaning reviews where you don't necessarily have to keep to the sort of conventional formula. It doesn't need to sound academic or scholarly. It doesn't even need to be an essay. It can take sort of any form that you can imagine that would possibly comment on a book. So we're pretty excited about that. I'll throw the submission guidelines in the chat in case anyone is interested.
Oh, perfect. And I'm going to compile these, this chat too. We'll put that out in a couple of different places because there are fantastic links along here.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jade. So last, I'm going to hand it over to Mark, and
Sure.
then we will conclude.
So I also read a lot of poetry, and just received a copy of Roxana Bennett's latest book with Gordon Hill Press. And so I'm in the middle of reading that book of poetry and enjoying it quite a bit. Made actually had a piece appear in the Windsor Review quite recently. And there's a kind of interesting pay platform for works accepted where you get a kind of gift certificate to, I don't remember the particular site at the moment, but I had to kind of go on there and try to find something to buy with the gift certificate that we received for the publication of the work. And I found a really interesting book called They Came From Within, A History of Canadian Horror. And one of my hobbies in the pandemic is to be kind of continually watching films of all kinds, but that particular, I definitely have an interest in horror films, and to sort of grab that, which is titled after a David Cronenberg film, also known as Shivers. I think that's the name of the book. So that book seemed interesting to me, and that's what I purchased with my poetry money. And I'm in the middle of that book. Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Oh, there's a link to that too.
There you go. I don't get any commission off that.
I know, yeah. This has honestly been a lovely experience. Thank you so much for everyone coming out and joining us live. And we couldn't ask for better seats, right? The comfort of our couches. So delighted. Look for us. We're going to take a little break for the summer, but By the River will come back again. I have Marty Gervais. His face is up here. He'll also be joining us in a later series as well, and we're compiling for the fall. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. If the three of us, or four, I guess, including myself, could stay just for a moment, and everyone else, enjoy the lovely day in the environments you're in.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody, for showing up. Really appreciate it.